Welcome everyone as you're joining. We're just going to wait a minute as people join. We're just going to wait 30 more seconds to see if we can get some more. I know we had quite a few people register, so I just want to give everybody the opportunity to pop on. I think we had a few technical issues with the registration process as well. And we are recording. Okay, I'm going to kick us off for the session, and as people join, we will just keep an eye on numbers and a reminder that the session is being recorded. But welcome and thank you for joining us for this showcase of the transformative power of digital twin in fostering climate resilience. Specifically, is the focus for today's session, hosted by the Digital Twin Hub at the Connected Places Catapult, the Digital Twin Partnership Australia, and the Digital Twin Partnership New Zealand. So we've brought together experts from across 3 continents. Don't think this has been done before. Just as a bit of a scene setter, you know, the world is facing unprecedented environmental challenges. The importance of data is where we want to sort of is underpinning the conversations today. It's the foundation of digital twin that digital twin is built on, and provides the insights necessary to understand the complex systems around us, to anticipate disruption and plan for that, and hopefully prevent, and in terms of informing strategic decision making. So we're going to have a deeper look at in a number of areas across the 3 continents. We've got 3 speakers today: James Strutt from the New South Wales Government, Julia McMaster from Wellington City Council in New Zealand, and Holly Hensler from the Connected Places Catapult in the UK. As we navigate through today's presentations and discussions, we're going to delve into quite a lot of what's going on in terms of best practice, how the initiatives have sort of been progressing, the inception of the projects that will be talked about. And there will be an opportunity then to have a bit of Q&A with the panel discussion after the 3 presentations. I encourage you to use the link in the chat function to a Slido website where you can just click the link, pop in, add your questions as the presenters are presenting, and then you can vote up questions as well. And so at the end, after the 3 presenters have given their talks, I will collate the questions and obviously go to the popular ones first, and then we'll run through the panel discussion just so we can get a little bit more in terms of some deeper dives into certain areas that the audience is interested in. This is an event, as I mentioned, that's bringing across 3 organizations across 3 continents. So it is a collaboration. It's a very connected approach, I guess, across the ecosystem of digital twin. 3 continents, 3 organizations. So I will first, before we kick off with the speakers, I want to invite Kat Sam from Digital Twin Partnership New Zealand, Gavin Cotterill from Digital Twin Partnership in Australia, and John Holden representing the Digital Twin Hub, to just say a few words with regards to your organization. Thank you.
Okay,
Gavin, you want to start off?
Yeah, I'll go first. Thank you, Janet, and great to be here today in terms of representing Digital Twin Partnership. This conversation with the DT Hub started last year with John and Justin. It's great to see that this has finally come to fruition in terms of being able to bring that collaboration together. And I think that's really important in terms of progressing the digital twin narrative, that we're able to enable that collaboration further. And that's what the Digital Twin Partnership was originally meant to bring in, really. That's sort of why, what, and how. the Digital Twin Partnerships really focused on originally in Australia, like all good ideas, is on the back of a napkin in a restaurant, and was really to fill a void in providing a consistent voice for the private sector with the nascent emerging digital twin agenda across Australia. Lots of stuff going on, and we wanted to tie that in by doing sort of three key things, really. That was sort of building advocacy, building community through events, and also building capabilities with sort of helping understanding in terms of with the growing understanding of what is a digital twin, building use case development and capability. How we've done that, we've started off as a volunteer base with some digital twin leads from across Australia, and we're now going through a sort of growing up phase by becoming official. So we're currently in the process at the moment of how do we move out from a volunteer based into a more of a constitution full-time sort of official basis. So watch this space for further developments for that. But I think what's really important was also in terms of the Digital Twin Partnership Australia focused on Australia, but also Digital Twin Partnership New Zealand focused on itself as well. So Kat, do you want to provide a bit of an overview on Digital Twin Partnership New Zealand?
Sure, thanks, Gavin. It's fantastic to be here. This evening, we launched the Digital Twin Partnership New Zealand last year with encouragement from the Digital Twin Partnership in Australia, so thank you. And our aim is to accelerate the adoption of digital twin in New Zealand. We're a group of passionate industry practitioners, so our aim is to provide leadership for industry, scaling through community and generating awareness and dialogue that's needed for sustainable growth of digital twin in New Zealand. As Gavin said, we align to the same key focus areas as the Digital Twin Partnership in Australia of advocacy, capability and community, but obviously within our own New Zealand context. So we have our own unique opportunities and challenges, and also our own environmental and social challenges and Indigenous knowledge approaches, and our own sort of government and legislative environment. But again, we also really feel strongly that collaboration is important. So we're really keen not only to focus on New Zealand, but also to connect and share from our global counterparts. And so we're really excited about this event as the first one. Looking forward to hearing from the speakers and looking forward to many more. Amihi.
John?
All right, I'll be brief just so we can get to the speakers. My name is John Holden, and I am on the Digital Twin Hub Community Council. And the Digital Twin Hub is essentially a knowledge-sharing community of digital twin enthusiasts from across the globe who are working together to progress the digital twin ecosystem. We are currently located in 85 different countries, spread across many different sectors. And we're always encouraging anyone and everyone involved with digital twins, find ways to collaborate to progress the ecosystem together, and find ways that we can work together to solve global problems through digital twins. If you have any questions to learn more about the Digital Twin Hub, feel free to reach out to myself or anybody from the DT Hub operational team. Thanks. Back to you, Janet.
Thank you, Gavin and John. A reminder that as we go through the presentations, use the Slido link that's in the chat to post your questions and vote up questions. My name is Janet McFall. I forgot to say that at the start, but I actually get to sit across a couple of these organizations. So part of the Digital Twin Leadership Team, Digital Twin Partnership Leadership Team in New Zealand, and also on the DT Hub Community Council. So now I will ask James Strutt from the New South Wales Government to talk about some of Australia's pioneering efforts in this space. Over to you, James. I'll watch the clock, and a reminder, just post your questions in Slido.
Thanks, Janet, and thanks everyone for being here. It's always good to sort of share stories and learn from others for these sort of events. So today really was about sharing with you an initiative that the New South Wales Government has developed called Land IQ. And the idea here is, I guess, just to provide a bit of an overview of what it is, but also the application when you think about the context of, you know, resilience and climate risk and how we can potentially plan for and respond to that in a more effective way. So if you go to the next slide, please. A really quick snapshot on what it is. So like I said, we've developed it here in the New South Wales Government, but importantly, we've done it with some private sector partners who are really at the front line of working with industry and working with other parts of the sector to make sure that what we've developed is tangible and useful for not just government, but much more broadly. We've been successful recently in securing some relatively significant funding in terms of scaling up what was a pilot up until January this year. But the real essence of this platform is, I guess, bringing together a lot of the really smart stuff and good work that's been done across the government sector here, and putting it into a centralized platform that can be easily accessed by not just those with an advanced, GIS or technical degree, but really lowering that technical capability threshold so that everyone from the bottom to the top can leverage and use this in their day-to-day work. And it's fundamentally a land use evaluation tool, but that can come in many forms, whether it's planning, property, environmental, climate. Most things that we deal with relate to land, and it's really trying to centralize that capability for the government. If you go to the next slide, please. So at the moment, at a very high level, we've consolidated a whole lot of different data sources across government, including federally, into a really easy to use interface for different members of government to use and local government. And the way that we've structured it is really, it's about top-down analysing an area through the geocentric analysis. So this could be things like how much of a local government area is impacted by certain risk factors around flooding and bushfire. What are some opportunities for housing development at that very macro level? And then moving down to site searches, identifying within that area, I want to look at particular options around, it could be affordable housing, it could be at-risk homes and communities. It's really about identifying that land that we want to look at in a bit more detail. And then the scenario planning is, we've found that land, it could be a precinct, it could be a whole region, and we want to look at some what if scenarios. So what if we relocated some of those communities? What's that look like in terms of a environmental, social, economic impact at a strategic level? And I think the real benefit that we're finding with something like this is not that it's going to solve the problem for you, but it's allowing everyone to talk the same language and to be able to get to a shorter list of options for detailed assessment really quickly. And in the context of this sort of resilience and natural hazard risk, time can be pretty critical when you're looking at these sort of things. So if you go to the next slide, please. I just wanted to really quickly walk through one of the use cases that really, I guess, took LandIQ from being a pilot into where it is today. We had some pretty devastating floods in northern New South Wales in a region called the Northern Rivers. In 22, there were some pretty major flood events, I think probably the worst in living memory for this state at least. And if you just go to the next slide, we were effectively able to use LandIQ as a tool to support all the displaced people in that community. There were about 2,000 residents at the time that were living out of their cars. Their homes had been destroyed. They had nowhere to sort of live or store their goods. So we had to really rapidly identify land opportunities for people to, I guess, live in temporary accommodation villages. And you can imagine that every man and his dog was throwing land at us. Some of them had competing, I guess, ulterior motives for why they wanted us to look at certain parcels of land. And being able to have a digital tool that could do this analytics consistently and effectively really enabled us to prioritize and ultimately get people in homes in a much more quicker fashion. And so if you go to the next slide, what we're able to do is, I guess, identify these different parcels of land for temporary accommodation villages. But the government also worked to procure a whole bunch of these temporary pods. So think shipping container modified type accommodation pods from multiple different suppliers. We were able to bring them into LandIQ as a digital representation of those built forms, such that working with different parts of government, we could update and modify site layouts and designs on the fly. And why that was really important was access roads were being cut off almost by the hour. And so that meant different suppliers with different product and these dwelling pods had to be applied onto a site. So we had to be able to rearrange these master plans in real time. And I guess the alternative, what would have happened in the past, it would have gone to a consultant, or trucks would have sat on the side of the road with these pods as the government figured out what it was trying to do. And obviously people are out of their homes, they're suffering. This really helped enable get people into those accommodation villages much more quickly. And the next slide, I think I've just got an example of what that looked like in terms of an end result on one of the sites just out of Lismore in New South Wales. So we often talk about digital twins. It's great to have that visualization of the real world in a digital sense, but this was a really good real world application that really, I guess, helped people on the ground. And so if we go to the next slide, I am conscious of time. I I guess the question is where to from here, and thinking about this in the context of a climate or a resilience perspective. If we just go to the next slide. We've received some funding here in Australia from the federal government, and really that's coming out of what's called the Disaster Ready Fund. So this is accessible across the whole of Australia, but the work that we're doing off the back of that is really geared at bringing in that climate and natural hazard risk into the day-to-day context for government. So being able to look at the whole of portfolios, understanding risk, prioritising where we need to look at in terms of potential relocation or asset risk or infrastructure network risk, and getting to the point where we're actually starting to be smarter about what type of land use should go on what parcel of land when we're looking at the future. Should we be putting a hospital in a location that's going to be underwater in 50 years? And those sort of smarter analytics about land use planning. And then my final slide, just off the back of this, is if you go to the next slide, the government here in New South Wales has really started to look seriously at this. So we've set up a reconstruction authority, which is really geared at providing that whole of state view around how do we mitigate these disasters at a state level across the board. But not only, I guess, from a strategic glossy document that sits on a shelf perspective, there's actually some real tangible implications of this. The assessment of climate risk has to be built into business cases, even down to the planning system when decisions are made around development applications. They have to have consideration of these things under legislative instruments. So this is starting to become very, very real. And I think where Land IQ and other digital tools like this, they're really well placed to help provide that capability to those on the ground that need to start applying this in the real world. And so that's all I wanted to cover. I know I only had about 8 minutes, but hopefully that's given a bit of an overview of what we're doing here in New South Wales. And hopefully there's some ideas there for how that might be able to be applied in some of the other jurisdictions on this call. But thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, James. Right on time. Julia, do you want to hop on and talk through the Wellington City Council story? Thank you. And a reminder to pop your questions in Slido, please, people.
Kia ora koutou, everybody. I'm Julia from Wellington City Council. I'm going to share an example around how we're using digital twin technology for community adaptation planning. So thinking about how we engage with our communities to support the city to change. And you'll notice I've got the proverb there, ka mua ka muri. This is thinking about walking backwards into the future. So thinking not just as we look forward in terms of our climate adaptation, but what we can learn from the past. Next slide, please. So in the Wellington context, we are a coastal city, which means that a lot of our communities are going to be impacted by the effects of climate change, both through things such as coastal inundation, sea level rise, and also our geography means that we're impacted by landslides and inland flooding. So we need to be able to engage with communities on a wide scale and thinking about how we do that. We've done that with one community in Makara Beach, only 50 households, and it took us about 1.5 years. So when we thought about how we're actually going to do this on a city scale, we needed to look at how could technology support this. Information around climate impacts is often relatively inaccessible. Communities don't really understand what it means for them in a local context, and it's often thought about as only sea level rise or something that's going to happen in 100 years' time. We also wanted to reframe and bring in a Te Ao Māori lens, which is really helpful in thinking about that more intergenerational and holistic perspective, and help our community to share their local knowledge in the way that the city looks to adapt. And our ultimate goal really is to build support for investment in adaptation and resilience and integrating that into our wider spatial planning and also helping residents to understand what they can do as individuals in the adaptation space. Next slide, please. Our project has 3 key goals. So increasing awareness of those local impacts, providing a resource that the community can use themselves for planning, but also in partnership with the council, and also to increase and diversify engagement. This is probably the biggest change that our city will ever go through. And traditionally, council engagements only see about 1% of the population engaging. So thinking about how do we create something that enables different audience and parts of the community to engage in a more accessible way. Next slide, please. And this is just touching on as part of our community engagement roadmap. It's really around raising awareness and then this planning with the community. Next slide. What we have done is, so we're using a game engine, Unreal, and we've built a digital model of the entire of Wellington City. This has been with funding with support from Bloomberg Philanthropies. The reason we've chosen to use Unreal is it provides us the ability to think about how do we communicate in the more narrative and storytelling aspect, moving away from purely the traditional data-heavy GIS engagements, which have often been used in the past. It also helps us to create scenarios both in the past where we might not have traditional data sets, so we can use archival information to create those images, and also in the future. So this is just showing our 3 key risks around landslides, coastal inundation, and flooding. Next slide, please. So where we're up to is we've built a prototype. So this is just a mock-up that we will transition into more of an interactive experience, but showing one of our coastal areas. If you're familiar with Wellington, this is where the airport is, and our main key risks are flooding and coastal inundation. Next slide, please. What this here is showing is looking back into the past. So in 1460, there was a massive earthquake in Wellington, which significantly altered the landform. And what we were wanting to do here was help residents to understand the way that the natural and man-made interventions of the city have led to the risks and impacts that we see today. So what this earthquake did was create a new connection between 2 pieces of land. Next slide, please. But also meant that one of our key suburbs is heavily risk prone, given that it's like a natural bowl shape. And what we're wanting the public to understand is there's both the man-made and natural impacts that lead to our risk profile. Next slide, please. We're also wanting to highlight some of the infrastructure impacts. So this is showing the drainage network that we have across and how some of the decisions we've made, such as increasing the built environment, reducing the natural environment, have meant that things such as this drainage network is less successful. Next slide. And also thinking about how we can bring in images both from the community to share their experiences of what they're actually seeing, and also looking into the past of the different flooding that has continued to happen, and then also the increasing frequency that we're seeing. Next slide. What this here is showing is the experience of coastal inundation. So thinking about in the past, we were, this area was sand dunes, and it had a relatively successful and natural way of absorbing rainfall. And as we've increased the built environment and this location being built in a tectonic plate, the land is actually sinking. And with coastal inundation, we are seeing the risk of water and flooding coming into this community. And we've been testing this concept. We've worked with over about 600 residents to understand, is this a powerful way of helping them understand past, present, future, and the impacts that they're seeing? And what we've seen is that creating it in a more realistic and visual way is helping people to connect. What does this actually mean for me and the community that I live in? Next slide, please. The next area of focus that we'll be looking at is thinking about different adaptation options. So once the community understand the types of impacts that we're seeing already and we're going to see in the future, we need them to think about what can we do about this. And this is across 3 different areas. So for our city, these are things that primarily like the council and central government would look to fund and drive, and those are more heavy infrastructure-based solutions. We also want to communicate both the complexities of adapting, so in terms of cost and durability, and then thinking about both in the community level around neighbourhood plans, and then at the at-home level. So we've started to explore some of the different options that individuals can do, things around nature-based solutions such as planting, permeable concrete solutions, and looking at how we can demonstrate to them the ways that they can do this themselves. We've found that this has been a relatively kind of unique approach to community engagement that we're looking to scale across the whole city and launching later in July this year. Thank you. And jump to the next slide. It's the end.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Julia. Wow. I felt like that earthquake was on right now with your voice shaking there a little bit while you were presenting. I don't know if that's what it was meant to be. All right, last speaker, last but not least, I want to, if Holly, if you want to jump on and run us through Credo and tell us all about it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Janet. And thank you, Julia and James, for some great presentations. So morning, afternoon and evening to everyone, all the international attendees. So my name is Holly Hensler. I'm a senior product manager here at Connected Places Catapult, and I do work on Credo, which is the Climate Resilience Decision Optimizer. Next slide, please. Okay, so the problem that we've seen with that we're trying to solve with Credo really is around this idea that cross-sectoral infrastructure interdependencies are actually currently quite invisible, but can be catastrophic. So, for example, we had a big storm here in the UK called Storm Arwen. We saw that actually the water companies had quite a lot of their assets go down because of the power. The assets they were connected to, but they had no idea about it. And this has caused quite a lot of problems for customers, for society. So we've really realized that there's actually a big deal about understanding these cross-sector interdependencies. So I'm going to give you a logical argument of actually this problem. Next, click, please. So as climate change continues, it's making extreme weather scenarios more frequent and worse. Next click. These extreme weather cause the individual assets to fail. Next click. When those individual assets fail, there are these cascade failures, that's what we call. So an idea that these infrastructure interdependencies create those cascade failures. So if one asset fails, then that causes a failure across to the next ones that they're connected to, even though that new next asset didn't fail directly. Next click. The infrastructure sector's interdependencies are not visible, as I explained, and this is mainly due to a lack of data sharing. So data sharing and that sensitivity of that data is a really important problem that we're trying to solve with Credo as well. And next click. And additionally, so understanding how to spend your resilience investment is a big problem. And if you can only see part of the problem and part of the effect of this extreme weather, it's really difficult to know how to spend that. So there's a real need for some support in that decision making through better data-led practices. Next slide. So here I'll take you through a diagrammatic view because it's quite a complicated thing. So for example, here I'll take you through the yellow would be power assets, the purple would be telecoms assets, and water would be the blue nodes. And so here you can see there are these connections between them. So it's often the case that power is the start of this, but it can be the case that it's cross-sectoral. So power is often dependent on telecoms exactly as well. And you can see here that we've mapped these dependencies. So let's say there's a big flood. So next click. And this takes out directly to power substations. So you can see the one on the left is dependent on the one on the right, but both of those have failed directly due to flooding. Next click. But now, due to these interdependencies, the rest of the network have also failed. So the telecoms and the water, and they failed indirectly because they're actually now not being powered. So it's really interesting because the water and telecoms companies may be able to map and model the failure of their assets in a flood, but here they weren't flooded, but still failed due to those interdependencies. So this is a really important part of what Credo is trying to model. Next slide, please. So taking that logical argument, what are the solutions that we can take forward? Next click. So in order to understand how climate change is impacting the weather scenarios, we need to be able to model the extreme weather. Next click. We need to then understand how that extreme weather affects the individual assets. So model how those individual assets fail in those different extreme weather scenarios. Next click. Then with regards to the infrastructure interdependencies, we now need to understand how those interdependencies link to each other, being able to understand it and then model that cascade failure. And so we call this the system-wide cascade failure. And then for the infrastructure interdependencies being not visible due to that data security, we need to be able to create a secure data sharing environment where the asset owners feel very safe that their data is absolutely secure. And then finally, in order to improve the decision making, it would be great to create some kind of decision support tool that takes into account that whole connected system. And again, this idea of delivering those data-backed insights. And it may be the case that actually when we come out with these insights of where best to spend your resilience investment, it may be a case that this is across organizations within one sector, but even the case that it may be cross-sectorally. And so we'll go on to that in a little bit more detail later. Next slide, please. So introducing Credo. So as mentioned, Credo is the climate resilience decision optimizer. So we've moved out of our demonstrator phase and we're trying to move towards an MVP and commercialization now. So it's a climate change adaptation connected digital twin. And this brings across all the data from currently energy, water and telecoms networks. But we're looking to expand those use cases to transport, to the built environment. So this is something that we're looking to work on with new partners. Currently, the companies that we've worked with are Anglian Water for the water company, BT for telecoms, and then UK Power Networks for power, and UK Power Networks are electricity distribution. So just a quick understanding of how the UK works. We're not, all of our infrastructure assets are not held by the government, so they're all by private companies, which makes things quite complicated, particularly around those data sharing infrastructure difficulties. And so we take this data and then we add on the extreme weather data, and then that understands those infrastructure interdependencies, that asset failure and how that system-wide impact can happen. And then taking forward, how do we prepare and respond to that? So on the right-hand side here, you can see this is an early prototype of what that would look like. So this is the map view on the Credo Digital Twin platform. So you can really see those interconnectivities and what's failed and what hasn't failed. Next slide, please. This then takes into consideration, once you've got all that data, now how do we actually take into account that resilience planning and for the best way to spend your resilience investment? So here we've taken all of that data and mapped it out onto the map. And you can see actually in terms of spending your money, which one would be your best value. So we take into consideration cost benefit analysis with economic models and utilizing AI. And then here you can see the different criticalities and where it's best to spend your money. Next slide, please. So a really quick one about the mission and the USP. It's really around connecting that those infrastructure dependencies, understanding that cascading risk that's invisible, and then enabling that coordinating decision making across the organizations and the sectors. And Credo's USP is really, as mentioned, that connecting that data that you really can't see because it's siloed, and then uniquely enabling that whole system approach when you model those interdependencies. Next slide, please. So a quick idea of how Credo works. Your inputs are, we start with data. So next click. And that data gets turned into models. Next click. And these then go into the digital twin technology. And then next click. You choose your scenario. So currently, as mentioned, the sectors are water, telecoms, and power. And the weather scenarios we've looked at are extreme heat and extreme flooding. Again, we're trying to expand those to other ones. And then the outputs are insights and decision support. So I'm aware my time is up, but quickly, next slide is just understanding that connecting the data across those sectors. So we're moving towards trying to test out a distributed data sharing architecture and potentially a federated one. So this idea of putting that into a secure environment so that we can get Credo started and working. And then final slide is really around how you can get involved. So this idea of expansion. So as mentioned, those use cases, we're looking to expand out our weather scenarios in our different sectors. And then collaboration, we'd love to hear from these different countries where you've had extreme weather, such as extreme heat, and how you've currently modeled that and your mitigation strategies towards that as well. So that was a very quick Credo. I'll pass over to Janet. I know I've been naughty and I've gone over, but thank you so much, everyone.
That's all right. Thank you. And thank you, Julia, and thank you, James. I have had a look at the questions in Slido. So just another reminder to please pop your questions in Slido or vote up the ones that are there. If I could get the speakers back, please. So Julia, James, and Holly, if you just want to put your cameras back on, that's cool. I have one question that actually works across all three of you. So I'll just I'll direct it at each of you. And then we've got a couple of others in there. So yes, please, audience. And we did have a really good turnout today, actually. So please put some questions in there for us. But the first question, I'll start with James, if you want to take it as the same question for all of you. What's been the biggest barrier to developing the solution in each of your cases? So what's the biggest barrier been for you, James, in your situation, in your case?
Change management, people. It's 95% of the challenge. I think you've got a lot of people that are used to doing things a very manual, non-digital way. They've invested their careers in that, right? And so it's changing people's perceptions into getting something like this off the ground. It's pretty significant change to the way of working for most people. But I think never waste a good crisis. We really leaped off the back of what the use case I mentioned before, but also the recent, push around the high housing crisis, which obviously isn't just in New South Wales. Those two things have really catapulted, if you present the case of you can do something faster, cheaper, and more effectively in a crisis, that's how I've found to really get the change to happen.
Never waste a good crisis. Julia, same question, biggest challenge.
Thanks, Janet. For us, it's probably thinking about narrowing down the content that goes into the tool. I didn't actually mention this is one tool that will be in a suite of engagements that the council does around climate adaptation engagement. But thinking when you're engaging with the community, you really have a pretty short attention span to engage them. So thinking about what are those really key things that we do and knowing it's really just a hook to get people to think, aha, I want to know more about this, and making sure we can direct them off to those spaces. But it's very hard, I think, when you're so involved in the content to realize actually that is not the most important thing, even though you want everyone to have a PhD in all of this information.
Cool. And Holly, biggest challenge?
Yeah, I think for us, the Credo's, as I say, I'm sure for Julia and James, it's quite a complex digital twin to start with, complex product to build. So there are quite a few challenges with regards to getting that asset risk modeling correct, the system-wide modeling. But I think for us, even before we begin, this idea of understanding and enabling that data sharing is really, really important, as has been quite difficult. So something we're looking to work on is putting together templated data sharing licenses for these big siloed industries that have very secure data that you can't share, and we don't want to have any leakages or anything like that. So that's probably been our biggest challenge, and can take up a surprising amount of time before you can even start working on the product.
It's interesting. Very, very varied perspectives, actually. There are a couple of questions in Slido, but I encourage the audience to please pop in some more. And I'm gonna go to a list of questions that we pre-prepared. So I'll start back with you, James, if that's all right. So I think you've mentioned it as well, the federal funding to do with fellow developing the natural hazard and climate-related digital twins capabilities. But working as part of the government, you obviously have a focus at a state level, but how can the work you're doing be leveraged across borders?
Yeah, I think the floods, again, is a good example of, natural disasters don't delineate between artificial borders. And we had a lot of instances where the data quality, the timeliness, and all the rest of it between Queensland and New South Wales who join each other was different. And obviously that really impacts decision making. And so having a capability that can operate across borders is really important. And what we've done in New South Wales, it really is agnostic to the data you put into it. It's a tool that can ingest information from, it could from the UK, from New South Wales, it doesn't matter, right? And we're trying to make this a functionality where others can, leverage off the back of the investment that the New South Wales government has made. We're a state government, we operate for the citizens, we're not in here to make a lot of money, and we really want to make this capability available across the board and to industry at some stage as well. So I think, yes, we're developing it here, but we hope it gets adopted by others as well, because we are really seeing some benefits out of it.
Great. Question for you, Julia, from the floor. What metrics or indicators will you use to measure the success, or did you use and will, I guess, the success of the awareness campaigns and the effectiveness of the tool in terms of that support for community planning?
Cool. So we're still developing the monitoring and engagement framework, but there's some kind of short-term metrics. So thinking about how do we capture the different type of individuals that are engaging to understand that kind of diversity and reach. And then thinking about both the kind of qualitative and quantitative analysis we can do around the longitudinal stuff of, is this actually driving any sort of behaviour change around people picking up those self-led adaptation options we can do. And also thinking about, are we seeing an increase in the engagement that the council is doing in their more kind of traditional engagement platforms. We're also evaluating the model as a tool itself. Is this a useful tool for engaging with the community, and could it be applied across different disciplines as well? So there's both the climate resilience specific questions, and then also as a technology, how can we use this across other areas for engagement?
Just a question related to that. How much of this will be made available? So like the frameworks, for example, that you're designing out, are you sharing with other council or Yeah, so with the funding we have from Bloomberg, the kind of two key things were that it was something different and innovative, and it needed to be replicable. So the software we're using is an Unreal that's accessible for everyone else to use, and then the approach we're taking will be documented and shared. And we've already started engaging with a couple of other cities, both in New Zealand and internationally, around the approach. That is fantastic. I've got a question here, Holly. It wasn't directed at anyone in particular, but I think it'd be a good one for you. Who was the best clientele that you started the conversation with to start amassing interest in what you were doing? And I don't know if you were involved right at the start of Credo or at what point you got in. I think you talked about it a little bit, but who was your, I guess, coalition of the willing and a primary person or a primary organization?
That's a great question, Janet. And I think so I've joined Credo within the last 10 months, but Credo's been going on for really since 2019. But yeah, I think for us, we've had real interest in the power sector. So as you saw on the diagram, power really has an impact on the rest of these asset sectors, versus the more so than the other asset sectors backwards. And so I think power are really aware of, if they go down, it has a much bigger impact than potentially some of the other sectors. So we found UK Power Networks has been a big supporter and a partner of Credo for the past a couple of years, which has been fantastic. And we are trying to expand that now, taking it from the energy distribution, electricity distribution, to electricity transmission, and really then bringing out that full energy sector, even including gas as well. So it'll be quite interesting to see if we can further improve that full sector view, which would be very interesting, and then that cascade.
That's really interesting. Yeah, the power piece. And as soon as it goes off, it's like, whoa, suddenly it's an impact that's immediate. And obviously there's ripple effect. Question for James. Quite a complex question. It's a good question, actually. If you had your platform in place before the natural disaster that we talked about, like I know it'll be used in different contexts, but let's talk about that one, the flooding. How would you imagine it being used on the ground? So getting into a war room, what analytics, who would be in the room, collaboration style, let's say, if you had the platform before?
Yeah, so I think we did have it in the middle of it last time, and I think it probably would have been used in the same way or similar. But had we had let's just say before that had happened, I think the real difference here would have been the planning component of this. So one of the things that happened during those flood events was a lot of the emergency services locations in Lismore and other major towns got wiped out. So think your ambulance, your fire and rescue, your police. And so the ability to have backup options where they can go and operate out of and plan for that in advance really would be something that you could have used the tool for had we had that before that event happened. And indeed, that's actually what's happening now. So we're planning in some of these at-risk communities, where would you put additional temporary villages? Where would you put combined emergency services hubs in the event we had to relocate? And so I think that would have been the difference. You wouldn't have had that downtime in the state emergency service type agencies.
Yeah, I can imagine that as a planning tool, like you say. I want to circle back to a couple of those, but let's go through these questions again from Slido. And again, we've still got time. I'm just going to have a check on time. Yeah, we've definitely got time. So pop some questions in. Don't be shy. A question for you, Julie's disappeared, but Holly, you talked a little bit on the last slide, and you're a bit rushed, or one of the last slides, about collaborations and how you wanted to reach out to different countries. So the question is, what are the most critical areas for future collaboration with other organizations and sectors, and how do you envision these partnerships actually improving the Credo functionality, so the functionality itself of Credo? So how is it a win-win?
So I think for us, we've, as mentioned, we started with flooding as our main use case, and then we've moved towards extreme heat. Now, the UK is not used to extreme heat. It's only been kind of really in the last year that we've had temperatures, around the 45 degrees Celsius. So this is new to us. And in terms of the ability to have that data and to have the predictive modeling for how assets are impacted by this heat, there's not a lot of historic data because we haven't really had this kind of weather before. So I think for us, it's been very interesting to learn from countries such as Australia and New Zealand, where you have that extreme heat weather as one scenario, and really understand how you model that against on your assets, how you model that across the system. And then additionally, what are your mitigation strategies as well? Because we're just not used to it. We know how to do flooding, and you put flooding barriers up and all of this, but here we're not used to extreme heat. So it's really interesting for us, I think, to collaborate on understanding and learning from you where you've seen it before and you've got that historic data.
There's definitely pockets of that data, I can tell you, in Australia. Definitely might be in New Zealand as well, but definitely more of it in Australia. I don't know what's happening with Julia's camera. We're trying to figure it out. But Julie, if you can hear me.
I can hear you. I have no idea what's going on.
It's just the city. I think you've got blur. So you've either got slide as the background or blurred background. And if you take those both settings off, we'll see you because we can see you behind the blur. But the question, just in the interest of moving along, the question is, are there comparisons with digital twin initiatives in other cities or regions that you potentially might have looked at, and what lessons have you learned in terms of the work at Wellington City Council?
Yeah, one of the spaces that's a good place to look for other examples is in the Growing Green Cities section of Esri's story maps. So some really useful examples, both from like Sydney in Australia, Norfolk and Virginia in the States, and also one in Nelson in New Zealand. One of the key things that we took from that was the ability to kind of have the city level and then be able to zoom down into the neighborhood. And so that's something that we're looking at how we can include. And then I think one of the things that we found was missing from those examples that we got through speaking with the community was the more narrative understanding. So it's this real push and pull of information. So often these tools are designed and the type of people are looking for this information, but how do you make it something that's more relatable and connectable to people who wouldn't necessarily go and seek out information about their property? So those were some of the spaces we took inspiration from.
Oh, cool little heads up there. And in terms of what was it, Esri's, what was it, Growing Green Cities, Greener Cities?
Yeah, I can pop it in the chat here.
Yeah, if you've got a sec, yeah, that'd be cool. James, can you discuss the role of cross-government collaboration in the success of Land IQ, particularly in terms of licensing and funding?
Yeah, so we here at the Department of Planning, we, I guess, developed an MVP pilot off the ground, but through, I guess, the engagement we had through the early phases of the tool, we had some co-investment from education, from transport, from other parts of government, and really kind of sell the idea of let's not build the same thing 3 or 4 times. Let's actually use the same foundation. We can bolt on the extra requirements that you have and have that sort of co-investment model. And so that's something that's really, I guess, helped sell the idea to it's not just making things faster and more efficient. You're actually avoiding cost because government tends to spin up similar tools all over the place and we don't really act very coordinated way. So it's, yeah, that's been a bit of a success story for us to getting the bigger funding, is showing we can do these bolt-ons and co-investment options as well.
Okay, cool. Sounds, yeah. No, you're good now. Like we can see your face and everything, but you can't see anyone, but that's great. I don't know what this technology thing is. It's so crazy. I was going to ask, I'm not quite sure where, like, I think everyone could potentially answer it, but I think it's more Holly and Julia. The question is the insurers, like, so is there a strong link with reinsurers and the insurance sector? Companies like, and there's a couple of companies mentioned here that look after statistical modeling to identify risks of extreme events. And have you been talking, I guess, or working with, or yeah, providing insights to that sector?
Shall I jump in, Julia, and then I'll pass it over. So yes, insurers are a very interesting user type that we have looked into for Credo. Obviously, an understanding of where things are going to fail and actually who's doing well at improving that resilience is quite important for insurers. We've found that it's definitely something that we're still quite nascent on. We need to figure out how the asset owners feel about insurers seeing all that data as well. So that's quite an interesting one. But there, in terms of the reporting that comes out of Credo, we are looking at kind of reporting back to the regulators for what they expect with regards to their resilience mitigation strategies and how they're doing that. And then the same to insurers as they're now taking this into consideration more and more. It may be the case that they look to Credo to get those insights. So it's definitely a use case we're looking into for sure.
Julia, any thoughts or involvement?
Yeah, so from our space, one of the things that has been a big discussion point for us is the information that's presented in the tool is not new information. It's been publicly available for quite a while, but what we've done is presented it in a more accessible way. And we talked a lot about this insurance perspective, and from thinking about it from the Insurance Council, it's information they're aware of, but what the shift has been is residents becoming aware of it and how it might impact their insurance. So we've definitely had to take kind of that risk lens of how we present the information and that balance of kind of inciting fear and what can we do to help people feel there's a way forward. But I think there's definitely that tension of, you know, helping people understand the risks, but then there are those people who live in these places where insurance and the ability to retreat will be significantly limited.
True, fine line, balancing act. I mean, it's just great segue then into another question for you, Julia. Focuses totally, like the solution that we've just talked about today, or the approach that we've talked about today, focuses on communication and engagement. You just talked us through that as well there again. Is the council, though, looking at using the digital twin capability you have and you're building in other aspects of your climate adaptation or climate change program?
Yeah, we are. And it was interesting seeing the work that both James and Holly have done. So what I've presented today is very much focused on that community engagement lens, but we still need to do work around the kind of analysis side of things. So we are beginning a work program that's looking more at that internal decision making around particularly risks to infrastructure, both from climate impacts, but also earthquakes, given that we sit on that massive fault line. So for us, our next focus is looking at how do we move into that more kind of traditional digital twin space. And a real benefit of that this project has already highlighted that we're looking to focus more on is that intersection between land use planning and then understanding risk. So previously these have been quite separate areas of council, and we're starting to see that with this digital twin technology, we can see that we need to have those functions working really closely together.
Cool. Similar question for yourself, Holly. I don't know how much you know. I know you had a slide there. Again, we sort of moved through it quite quickly, and I encourage people, we will have, it is being recorded. We will make it available at both the DT Hub website and Digital Twin Partnership. So do look out for the video and share it as well. But and you can go back and listen, obviously. But Holly, in terms of next steps, you talked about, you know, connecting data more and the federated models. But what else? Like, if you want to talk a little bit about those, but also what else? What's the future of Credo look like?
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of the future, there are a couple of kind of buckets that we're trying to add to in order to get it to MVP. So we have the use cases, and they split into 3 buckets of, you know, the weather scenario or non-weather scenario. So as mentioned, we're looking to continue expanding extreme heat, but we're also looking to do coastal erosion stuff. So Julia, your work was really interesting to me. And moving that in terms of the weather scenarios, but then also expanding into different sectors. So as mentioned, you know, looking at transport, expanding out the energy sector to be a bit more granular, and then the geography as expansion as well. So currently we've got kind of different spots of the UK where we've had that kind of mix of the infrastructure sectors, so the water, the telecoms, and the power, but for one section. So we're trying to expand that nationally, as well as potentially internationally as well. And then that data piece as well, we've got to make sure that sits right, and we have something that is templatable and ready to go for people, so they can actually start utilizing Credo either from an input perspective or from an output perspective. So those are our main focuses to get done in the next kind of 3 years, I would say.
And people find out more just on the Credo website? Like, is that where the best place to go? Connected Places Catapult and then Credo within that, I think it is. Do you want to pop it into the chat, just the website for where they can find out more and how to connect them with what you're doing? And James, in the meantime, I guess, yeah, similar question. Then I've got another question for you as well. But yeah, what's next for the platform? And you probably already got a pipeline of stuff. So sort of a 2-part question: what's next, and how has that been influenced by your users or your stakeholders?
I'll answer the second one first very strongly. I mean, obviously, we've been given a mandate to make this self-sustaining within a couple of years. So that's about obviously delivering on value, proving it, crystallizing it, and making people change. Keep coming. That's really important, change management. It's getting it across multi-tiers of government. We all operate in the same land use planning and infrastructure space, so we need to all be working together off the same platform and same data. But I think it's also about working with industry, and we're doing something pretty cool at the moment with the government architect around a pattern book approach to housing delivery. And so being able to provide people that information in a very easily accessible, templated way when they're making land use or development type decisions. And so that's really, it's about extending the user base to those other kinds of groups and partnering with the university sector as well around, obviously they could use what we have for research projects, but that research project in turn can provide a lot of value and data inputs for the platform itself. So, yeah.
Loads of opportunity. Again, if you want to, Holly's put hers, and if you want to just put a link for people, I mean, there's some questions in there about contact details, and I think the best way is just to post the websites into the chat, and people can just pick them up from there, if that's all right. I think that's probably the best approach. Thanks for that, James, and sort of a 2-part question there. We've got, just having a look, that's it. God, that went fast, first of all. But thank you for the presentations, James, Holly, Julia. Thank you for coming on and giving us your thoughts, or giving us some insights. Sorry, I just turned that off. Giving us your insights into the Digital Twin Hub, Digital Twin Partnership Australia, and Digital Twin Partnership New Zealand, Gavin, John, and Kat. As I said, it's been recorded. I started off saying it was very much about a data. I think you'll see that there's a common thread through there, but also obviously thinking about your user and who you're engaging, and then your key stakeholders, and that whole focus on impact and working your way back from that. I like the idea of, we didn't touch on it in depth, but data sharing and those sort of complexities around AI. I think we focused a lot on the fact that we can learn from each other and collaborate, and that was the whole point of the exercise. Our whole impetus at Digital Twin Hub and Digital Twin Partnership is about accelerating the opportunity for greater adoption of digital twin and what it can do for people and planet. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. A reminder, it will be recorded and made available on the website, and I will let you all go, and we're right on the time. Thank you.